The wings of my words lift up my story as I sing up the time that I thrived in the cradle of man, amongst the riches of the earth when I belonged to the land. Roots firm, reaching deep into the soil below. The terrors that awaited me, no way I can know. Though I heard stories told about the man-looking ghost and the monsters that they rode around the oceans, trading souls, body snatching, flesh and bones. I heard fathers begin to vanish. I heard the ghosts were eating children. Mothers began to panic. I heard the ghosts could carry sticks that made a terrifying sound, and that a man would never stand after the stick had put him down. But the story was so wild, they were difficult to believe. Like gossip at the market was just whispers on the breeze. I was relieved when I considered in my favor were the odds, because my family always paid a healthy tribute to the gods. See, my daddy was a chief, but a warrior at heart. Anyone who became his enemy wasn't very smart. His reputation was impeccable, a very paragon. His wisdom, bravery, and mercy known for villages beyond, only rivaled by my mom. She was the voice of our tribe. In each and every endeavor, she kept the ancestors alive. Even outside of her presence, I could hear her in my mind, ever with me like a guide. It's been something quite divine. And we thrived, till one day we were visited by a prince of a village not far away. He was trying to convince my father to give his people refuge in our lands. They weren't safe once they came, and an enemy advanced. An enemy that until recently enjoyed a lasting peace with our particular tribes. Then tensions started to increase when young people started disappearing at alarming rates. So the prince traveled to the enemy and asked them to their face, had they seen hide or hair of the recent missing youth. He could tell their chief's response was not resemblant of the truth. And he noticed weapons that they used nowhere were native to our land, and one bloodthirsty looking man with a long stick pipe in his hand. And he could have swore he saw a ghost peek out a hut that had brightly painted skin. The prince could not remember much, but whatever it was, he had caught it by surprise, but he knew it was alive as he looked into its eyes. And the enemy's insolence was curiously bold. The faces of everyone in the tribe were looking cold, so the prince excused himself and began to take his leave, but he could feel the eyes following him along into the trees. They had something up their sleeves. The gods spoke to him on the trip back to the village and decided he'd get ready to be hit by the enemy's warriors in the following weeks. He decided then and there, he and my father had to speak. He made his way to our village, that's without skipping a beat. He was followed by a gift of 50 goats and 40 sheep. He asked my father for protection, and if his people could stay with our village, and if so, they would arrive later that day. As my father considered his request, a thunderous crack startled everyone, and the prince staggered 2 steps back and collapsed to his knees, staring down at his chest because a little hole had opened up there and the hole was leaking blood. The prince had secretly been followed back to our village. I heard more thunderous cracks and swelling sounds of rape and pillage, battle calling, children crying like none before our land. Enemies were sending death out of long stick pipes in their hand. My father started sending arrows just to try to buy some time, but the enemy seemed to have some kind of demon on their side. Someone hit me from behind, right in the back of my head. It hurt, but I remembered in relief it wouldn't hurt if I was dead. My vision started going hazy, and I saw my mother's face, but we were not in our village. We were in another place. She told me that she was transitioning, and things were going to change, that I'd never see her again, but we would speak in other ways. That I descended from a queen, and let no one take that away, and that the king my father was, I would be similar one day, and that my soul is a possession wicked men would try to claim. But I was property of the gods from the cradle to the grave. But my descendants would endure hardships, take many pains. Ghosts would shackle us in chains, they would lock us in their cages. But we would persevere, sing our songs, and write our names on the walls of history and revolutionary change. Then my mom faded away, and the pain inside my head intensified as I awoke to seeing bodies lying dead. Overwhelmed, I turned away, but right there on my other side was my father against the hut, and his hands and feet were tied. He was bleeding from his side, he was bleeding from his eye. The invaders demanded something, but he just would not comply. They beat him, kicked him, tortured him as I tried to rebel. Then I quickly discovered my hands and feet were tied as well. Then another thunder crack. My father's body, it went stiff. The light faded from his eyes. His facial expression went limp. Then someone threw a torch onto the hut he lay against, and prematurely up into the sky my dad made his ascent. Then I saw the strange character from the story of the prince. The ghost surveying my village. He had brightly painted skin. It was pale and almost white. It felt my glance, looked in my eyes, and reviewed me with the type of look I cannot quite describe. Then I was forced to stand and herded into a line. Chains were put on the hands and feet of the living members of my tribe. We were marched for many hours. The girl in front of me died. We only stopped to pry her from the chains and cast her to the side. Every other day we'd sleep under the unforgiving sky. I wondered if the gods listening could hear my people's cries. Sometimes I thought I heard my mother's voice, but not coming in clear above my tribes, cries of terror, cries of anguish, cries of fear. Then one day I knew certainly our numbers were growing because I heard murmurs of other languages underneath the moaning, sounds my people couldn't make, that we increased, that would explain the growing echoes and the swelling, thumping rhythms of the chains, the rhythm of the chains thumping, weighing each one of us down. Conspiring with gravity to keep us on the ground, but succumbing to that weight would mean an everlasting death. So I summoned all my strength and I kept up with the step. I kept up with the step. I summoned all my strength and I kept up with the step. The rhythm of the chain thumping, weighing each one of us down, conspiring with gravity to keep us on the ground. Thumping, weighing each one of us down. Conspiring with gravity to keep us on the ground. But succumbing to that weight would mean an everlasting death. And so I summoned all my strength and I kept up with the step. I kept up with the step, the rhythm of the chain thumping, weighing each one of us down. Weighing us down. Conspiring with gravity to keep us on the ground. They want to keep us on the ground. Succumbing to that weight would mean an everlasting death. No! Never! So I summoned all my strength and I kept up with the step. I kept up with the step. I kept up with the step. Rhythm of the chain thumping, weighing each one of us down, conspiring with gravity, keep us on the ground. Succumbing to that weight would mean an everlasting death. So I summoned all my strength and I kept up with the step. 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 The rhythm of the chain thumping, weighing each one of us down, conspiring with gravity to keep us on the ground. They want to keep us on the ground. We're going to fly. They want to keep us on the ground. We need to fly. They want to keep us on the ground. stomach on my stage. I kept up with this stuff. I kept up with this stuff. I kept up with this stuff. Yo, we pass messages described as exhausted, heavy breaths, disguised as exhausted, heavy breaths. But soon, I knew we were headed west because the smell of salt joined with the whispers on the breeze. It was becoming evident that we were headed for the sea. We were headed for the sea. The cruel and mighty sea, I had heard he was the one that had an unrelenting grudge against us children of the sun because the sea wanted to grow, expand the borders of his home. The sun's children occupied the land that he wanted to own. So he rumbled with resentment and beat up on the shore. Still, he would not take it too far because he did not want a war. He did not want a war with the sun, knocking a sacred balance out of control. But occasionally he'd swallow one of her children whole. The cruel and mighty sea, I had heard he was the one that had an unrelenting grudge against us children of the sun because the sea wanted to grow, expand the borders of his home. The sun's children occupied the land that he wanted to own. He rumbled with resentment. He beat up on the shore. Still, he would not take it too far because he did not want a war with the sun knocking a sacred balance out of control. Out of control. But occasionally he'd swallow one of her children whole. So he rumbled with resentment and beat up on the shore. Still, he would not take it too far. He did not want a war with the sun knocking a sacred balance out of control. But occasionally he swallowed one of her children whole. We arrived at a settlement just along the coast. Hundreds of prisoners, our enemy kidnappers, and the ghosts. I had seen the mighty sea in paintings before this moment. Here there was a strange monster lying on the sea, floating, a long, sharp, wooden beast, tied up with ropes and sheets. The rhythms of the chains had stopped, but this had picked up on the beat. As it bobbed and it swayed, we stood there in chains and fear with our captors, till I noticed that the ghost had disappeared. Then the thunder cracks returned. Our kidnappers started falling, cursing out as they lay dying. On their gods, I heard them calling. A few of them threw down their weapons when they saw the others dead. Fell down on their knees and put their hands above their heads. It was the ghosts returned with other ghosts and men that looked like me, but they were dressed up differently and they smelled like the mighty sea. They were thieves stealing us from the captors who stole us first. Right then I got the feeling things were about to get worse. Our captors that surrendered, they were shackled up with us. The ghost was unaffected. He had just betrayed their trust. He pointed his stick pipe at us, then at the monstrous wooden beast, breathing heavily and bobbing on the cruel and mighty sea. He wanted us to approach this monstrous thing by how he gestured. He started shouting even more aggressive to increase the pressure. Then a rope ladder emerged down from the monster's side, and it was clear we were about to be taken for a ride, but none of us complied. Our legs were paralyzed with fright to feed ourselves to the wooden monster. Nothing about that felt right. We resisted by refusing to move and stood in place. So the ghost took the stick pipe and thunder cracked somebody's face. Blood splattered on many of us. People began to wail. Our legs started thumping toward the monster. We had failed to assert sovereignty over our bodies and withstand the ghost apparent plan to separate us from our land. Reaching the ladder to the monster, as I stepped up off the earth, I could feel the bond breaking with the terrain of my birth. A force inside that previously to me was unknown seemed to fall right out of me and leave my body on its own. I never felt so much alone. As my homeland disappeared and the monster that we now rode upon veered up and down, as the cruel and mighty sea raged and swelled, we were throwing up the contents of our stomachs, and it smelled, and the smell just made it worse. But soon the sea began to ease, and I could feel the monster sinking into balance with the breeze. I saw a small mound of land ahead of us getting bigger. My heart beat a little stronger and returned a bit of vigor. But the small mound of land was surrounded by the sea on all sides, and I wondered what type of place it could be. As the monster brought us closer, my vigor became a chill. There was a giant stick pipe pointed at us from a hill. But then the ghost began to wave and pulled upon some ropes. The stick pipe turned away and immediately returned my hopes. I realized they were trading signals. This was our destination. The ghost's body language changed and energized with expectation. The monster came to a rest. We were ordered to stand. Now we were about to meet this tiny sea-surrounded land. Goree Island. They let us off the monster as a swelling song of pain enveloped us along with the thumping rhythms of the chains. The rhythms of the chains thumping, weighing each one of us down, conspiring with gravity to keep us on the ground. But succumbing to that weight would mean an everlasting death. So I summoned all my strength and I kept up with the step. It was the island I had heard tales about around the fire. You could hear it by the sound as the volume raised higher. A grim choir of horrific pain enveloped our souls, reaching deep into our consciousness, establishing control. More and more the smell of feces, urine, and rotting flesh overpowered and attacked us and robbed us of our breath. It got stronger with each step, with the right, with the left. The assault on the senses overwhelmingly intense. There were more ghosts with white skin everywhere, lurking in the shadows, stick pipes strapped to their backs like it was a bow and arrow. They seemed to hide from the sun and tense up in the light. And the way they looked at the sun's children wasn't right. A look combined with spite, lust, fear, hate, and greed. All the reasons that a ghost would return to life in me. I saw young people crying while paraded and presented to old ghosts while other young girls were watching who were pregnant. And the monsters, our chain gang was held up and all peace eliminated. But for the first time in our journey, families were separated. Crying mothers beaten badly, thrown in the dungeon. Fathers bloody, reaching for their children, still continued lunging. And the cries joined with the awful chorus of the island. The awful power of that unified struggle was terrifying. It was ringing in our ears. It was throbbing in our bones as they packed us in the cages made of dried up earth and stones. Why didn't they just end us? Why prolong this tragedy? This ghost seemed to be practicing some new type of depravity. Every indignity one could possibly imagine happened. Nightmares transformed into action. This island had to be infected by some evil magic that inspired the ghosts to torture us with such barbaric tactics. They kept us in the dark. We were shackled to the floor, shackled necks, arms, feet, until my flesh the shackles tore. I lost all sense of time because they kept us from the sun. The prisoners in my cell all seemed to speak a different tongue. So the darkness was my only friend on who I could depend. It obscured the awful suffering that seemed to have no end. When one of us would die with intensify our cries, eventually a door would open and a piercing light would shine. Burning at our eyes, the ghost would show up to remove someone who had expired and just drag them from the room. I noticed changes after that. They'd show up regularly soon. Let us out to relieve ourselves and make us eat a little food. If we ate once a day, we had been there for weeks. Voices started visiting me in the darkness. They would speak to me, encourage me to eat and learn the purpose of this place and study every detail so one day I could make my escape. But sometimes I get discouraged in my mission to be free when I recall we were surrounded by the cruel and mighty sea. To guarantee safe passage through him, somehow in my plan, I need to tame and drive that monster that removed us from our land. And how would I do that? I blurted into the dark. In response, I heard a voice that spoke directly to my heart. It sounded like my mother, but plural and from above, and musically vibrating in the harmony of love. The voice told me something I can't quite translate into words that amplified my awareness and still settled down my nerves. I felt countless heartbeats unifying in a rhythm with our breaths, along with every other sound there in the prison, in the smell, in the dark, in the fear, in the thoughts. I was present with it all. I was conscious of a force that united everything together. I becoming one with my environment, my company, the earth, moon, and the sun. I felt the pain of every prisoner. I felt our captors' greed. Call, response, inhale, exhale, like the rhythm that we breathe became a rhythm I could see, smell, taste, hear, and feel. My awareness of the rhythms all around me was surreal, but it was real. I felt the rhythm was approaching our cell. They were coming to take us out for something new, and I could tell. And then the door opened up and the light singed everyone's eyes except for mine, because I wasn't even the least bit surprised. Though this wasn't the normal time to relieve ourselves and eat, we were marched to a courtyard that was so bright I couldn't see. Until my eyes began to focus, I saw some ghosts up on some steps. They were staring at us just like they could see through our flesh. The ghost handling us pulled out my lips to show my teeth. They rubbed the contours of my chest like it was a piece of meat. One ghost was staring at my manhood with obsession and disgust. He circled round to see a better angle of my butt. The ghost handling us started chanting out a song. The others got quiet and braced themselves to play along.
The next one.
I could feel the song was about the prisoners, one at a time. The ghosts. The ghosts would raise their hand and chime in. The handler would rhyme. The rhythm of his rhyme would fluctuate and pick up speed. The rhythm of his rhyme would fluctuate and pick up speed. The rhythm of his rhyme would fluctuate and pick up speed. He'd make a call and wait for a response before he would proceed. The ghosts came anticipated with intense anticipation. Their gaze seemed to ignite and flame up their imagination. Until one of them clearly raised the stakes with this reply. The handler then ended the song, and the ghost seemed satisfied. I was led to a different cell with a different set of men, and unfortunately plunged into the darkness once again. But the ghost who had the last word at the ceremony about my body visited our cell and looked over us slowly. He had the same look at his face on his face I had seen for the first time when my tribe was attacked with stick pipes the day my parents died. A look combined with a restless, hungry look, like his soul was keeping score. As if he was deprived of love and hurting us would make him more. He would watch us from the doorway when they brought us food to eat. The food improved. We ate more. It became easier to sleep. And when I sleep, I see my mother. She would come to me and speak. It was the only time since we were stolen that I felt complete. In the dreams, I was free. And I would listen while she teach. She taught me things about my heart and how to listen to the beat. Because everything that will be, all there ever was, that information was within me in the rivers of my blood. And I received that wisdom through the rhythm as it pumped the essence of abundance through my form, powering up my vehicle with purpose in concert with the gods. But with these avaricious phantasms, I'd always be at odds. I awoke with cold water splashing all over my back, and the sounds of other angry, startled prisoners. We snapped to attention as the light shocked and bullied through the door. Someone was pulling at our chains to stand us up off of the floor. They pulled us out our cell, but made an unusual turn. We didn't head toward the courtyard as I wondered with concern. Then I remembered the rumor floating around the prisoners that would speak in my language about the doorway of no return. I had heard there was a portal at the west end of the labyrinth that each prisoner would be taken to one day and they would vanish. Now what would happen when they vanished, it was difficult to imagine. Some said death, some said it was some other type of passage. I got ready for my death. As we marched toward a light, my heart was beating out a rhythm to some type of sacrifice, but it was not a song of death. I was rumbling with life, along with other rumbling, and you could hear it reach a height. It was the cruel and mighty sea. I heard and saw him strike the beach. As I walked through the doorway of no return, the monstrous wooden beast was devouring prisoners. As we traveled up a plank, we had no time to think because our chain was being yanked. As I walked up the surface of the beast, I looked back to behold the fortress that had just imprisoned me. Massive walls erect in opposition to the sun. Confining her children, I feared for them what was to come. As I was pulled into the bowels of the beast, I saw a glimpse of the sky touching the sea. And they both looked infinite. Then that was it. I was pulled into the stomach of the beast. Bodies piled on top of bodies. It was difficult to breathe. The air was saturated with expired breath and sweat. The heat introduced itself and then began to press. My body was compressed into a slot and it was set. Its anguish overwhelmed the timbre of the voices in my head. So many voices at the same time. I could not hear what they said, but I could hear them in my blood. That some were voices of the dead. Then we were cut off from the sun. Entered darkness, my old friend. At least he came to help obscure new awful miseries again. The miseries they raged as the monster rocked and swayed as we languished in his stomach, suffering so many ways, suffering from the unknown. Realities were broken. It was only 2 or 3 moons since our identities were stolen. I had recently been prince in the riches of my land. Now I had shackles on my feet. I had shackles on my head. I was surrounded by the pain of prisoners being ripped from the bosoms of their homes. They were hurting. They were sick. They are howling in languages I could not comprehend, as if something was being torn that'd be impossible to mend. In the darkness we were one with no beginning and no end. I wondered if the mighty sea was finally taking his revenge against us children of the sun. And maybe this was his plan. He'd always been so envious of the beauty of our land. And I could feel his presence and awful power all around. And from below I was undone by waves of energy and sound. Frequencies that certainly did not belong to the living. The vibrations making their way inside of us were chilling. I could not think my own thoughts. I heard constant interference. Our floating dungeon was being inhabited by spirits. I could hear them in the creaking of the wood that held us caged. They engaged when the ocean's motion jangled our chains. I could hear them in the sobs and the exhausted heavy breath. Some were begging us to live, some invited us to death. When one of us would transition, our consciousness would divide, and soon I'd feel them join the looming presence on the other side. Maybe this is what the prisoners had referred to on the sea-surrounded land as the doorway of no return. Death was calling out my name, getting louder, coming from the growing number of prisoners that had recently succumbed. Particularly a young man that lay crying by my side with a fury that had recently been extinguished from his eyes. His dead eye looked right in mine. He spoke without moving his mouth, in perfect unison with the chorus taking the form to announce, only our death would renounce this journey made in chains. The ghost that drove the beast wanted to make us into slaves and force our passage to a stolen world on the other side of no return, where together we reside. And the children of the sun would be tortured to comply and punished by withholding lives from us that were dignified. To boot, the ghosts would infect us with the sickness in their souls. That worship of avarice with appetite with no control. They were phantasms, fantasizing in silver and gold, shiny colors that would come to represent what they had sold, their very souls, along with everything else they try to sell. Earth, blood, energy, even the stories that we tell. They try to sell our very progeny, no limit to their greed. They try to purchase time and space and possess things they didn't need, plundering the land with no effort to replenish. Hence this grim chorus of death was trying to bring us to our senses, conjuring the future so that we would understand what lay ahead for the sun's children in the fateful stolen land. Time enjoyed a lost perspective in the stomach of the beast, but it was certain that this death chorus increased. As the volume fortified, drowning out other sentiments, priming the chamber for the fog of pain and pestilence, and fear of the unknown, and the wickedness of the ghost, and the cruelty to which we continue to be exposed. This awful fear patrolled the room, suffocating our hopes as we lay there in restraints, bound by shackles, chains, and yokes. I was broke, discouraged, and overwhelmed by it all when I noticed water gathering as if coming through the wall. But it held itself together and took a vertical form. A breathtaking, iridescent presence had been spawned. Right before my very eyes, that she spoke to my very heart when she acknowledged me by name and gave me comfort in the dark. She told me that I had to persevere and strengthen up my mind. It was a must that I survive, because my purpose was divine. My parents had been slain, so now I technically was king. And to the faithful stolen land, my royalty I had to bring. Because the children of the sun because the blood of kings would surely be needed to help combat the threat the ghosts were poised to pose to very life itself. She commanded me to live. I had to reach the stolen lands. If I died here, the cruel and mighty sea had nefarious plans. Outside the walls of this great wooden beast, cruel, ferocious beast did swim, keeping pace and waiting hungrily to tear me limb from limb. And then the sea would have my blood as he had wanted from the start. And then my soul would never rest. It would wander through the dark. Underwater it would rage for an eternity or more, isolated from the sun on the frigid ocean floor. In fact, the beast I was aboard, being stolen from my home, was following along the path of several trails of bones on the frigid ocean floor. So if I could, I should stay strong, because many entities from home would be following along. And we would not be alone. These entities would find a way to keep track of us and lend a wisdom to our gaze, or occupy our very bodies with great power when invoked, and protect us from the avaricious sickness of the ghost. What a fate she described. All I could do was wonder why such a diabolical endeavor anyone would try. What was missing from their lives they had to take and feed from mine? And what could possibly inspire such an irreparable crime? It was elaborate, audacious, and shamelessly depraved. I was dazed, trying to figure out to what length these ghosts were crazed, and how they befriended the cruel and mighty sea in such a way the very flow of human life was being completely rearranged. And with that, I felt a rhythm, a switch in the rhythm of us all. The iridescent message disappeared back through the wall. I heard the heavy creaking and the grind of sliding metal. A commotion was commencing above on the upper level of the beast. The ceiling opened, attacking us with light. It hurt my eyes, so for some time I just listened rather blind. A cruel and mighty sea brazed its way in and cleansed the air, but also let compare the wretched odors of despair. Some ghosts entered our chamber. They sang to one another. I could tell they sang to temper the pure terror they discovered. One carried a bottle with an old fermented liquid. The other jabbed at us with a stick pipe just to see who shifted. They were checking on which prisoners were still breathing more left, or who'd escaped by them, persuaded by the grim chorus of death. When they find one of us dead, they remove him from the locks, sip fermented drink, and drag the body back on top. The ghosts tried to continue singing, but soon they were overcome by the devastating squalor that its children have. The sun had been subjected to for days, weeks, months, I couldn't tell. I think the iridescent message protected me with a spell. I felt outside of my body in new chambers of my mind, obsessing over the iridescent message to survive. So many children of the sun had died, but I was still alive. I could still feel their rhythm getting to me from the other side of no return, but they'd always be a part of what I was. The thought distracted me, while chains forced and pulled me from above onto the surface of the beast. I saw the vast unending sky. The light was burning in my head. The air was stinging at my eyes. Siblings and cousins, let's chill for a second. Thank y'all for sharing that piece with me.